The Centre Pompidou in the city of Paris is Baudrillard's example of the architecture in the third order of the simulacra. For Baudrillard, the Centre Pompidou is a museum that's not a museum. It's a sort of monument that's not a monument. He sees the Centre Pompidou as a building embedded in a series of contradictions. On the one hand, he sees the building, he says, like a kind of nuclear power plant. It draws in cultural energy from outside. It pulls people's attention in with the promise of art. And yet at the same time, he sees it as dissuading art, as deterring culture. It surrounds itself, he says, like a security zone, just like a nuclear reactor surrounds itself with security to protect the art that's inside. He says that on the one hand, it looks like an oil refinery, and on the other hand, its interior is like a warehouse. So it's a contradictory idea about functionality, about storage, but then it promises to house art. So it's a curatorial problem that Baudrillard finds contradictory. What kind of art do you put in a building like this? The building produces a mass audience. It invites all of the masses to come to witness the art. And yet when they arrive in this enormous plaza, what happens is just a spectacle. It's not art at all. It's just a spectacle of the mass arrival. The building promises an explosion, a kind of revolutionary event, he says. But when the masses arrive, the opposite happens. It's an implosion. The whole thing begins to collapse under its own weight, a radical cultural implosion. I think it's helpful that Baudrillard actually compares the Centre Pompidou to the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower is a monument, but it's a monument to nothing. It doesn't house a museum. It just marks a place. But by marking that place so monumentally, it creates too a spectacle. Baudrillard doesn't mention it, but Roland Barthes, another French philosopher, talks about the Eiffel Tower as being the degree zero of monumentality. The Centre Pompidou does something very similar. It marks a place. It announces a spectacle. And yet, it's not really a monument to art. It's monumentally anti-monumental. It's a sort of degree zero of monument. It tries to represent the power of an art and a culture which is not actually there. To understand Baudrillard's claims about the Centre Pompidou, it would be helpful to have a counterexample. Let's take the Whitney Museum in New York by comparison. It was designed in 1966 by Marcel Breuer. It was the first museum in Manhattan after Frank Lloyd Wright's Guggenheim Museum. When Breuer recounted his first ideas for the museum, he said he asked himself this question: what should a museum look like in New York City? What should be the relationship of a museum to the city, to a city like Manhattan? Then he answers his question. He says, well, it's easier to say what it shouldn't be. He said it should not be like a business, should not be like an office building. Should not be a commercial building. It should convey the sincerity and profundity of art. It should convert, he said, the vitality of the street into the sincerity and profundity of art. Breuer's reflections, although maybe seem a little bland at first, they actually take on an urgency if you think about the context. At this moment, American affluence in the 1960s was the motor of a growing consumerism like the world had never seen. And of course, Madison Avenue, which was the site of the Whitney, symbolized through its ad agencies, through its boutiques, this growing consumerism. And it was this consumerism that Breuer was afraid would encroach upon art, would invade the more elite space of art. Breuer wasn't the only one concerned about what he called the sincerity and profundity of art as a sort of defense against consumerism. The critic Peter Blake had this to say about the Whitney Museum. Here on Madison Avenue, Breuer is about to mount a massive attack on all those who have made the name of this avenue synonymous with their racket. The new Whitney will be art's answer to the huckster. Where the ad agencies operate behind flimsy glass walls, the Whitney will be wrapped in concrete, faced with granite. Where the commercial ziggurats push the pedestrians off the sidewalk, the Whitney will invite them in. And where the right side up ziggurats down the avenue, the ziggurats he's referring to are products of the Manhattan zoning laws that require buildings to step back to allow light down in. So the right side up ziggurats, he said, now symbolize the huckster's perversion of art, whereas the Whitney's upside down monolith becomes a powerful symbol of sailing against the current of the time. So it's funny, sort of 1950s, 1960s language about hucksters and their racket, but you see the point that the Whitney would become a refuge for art. The Whitney would be a defense mechanism to protect the elite power of artistic experience. The photographer Ezra Stoller took the photographs of the interior, and even though some of Whitney's spaces are very, very large, Stoller able to capture what I think was Breuer's intent was that there was almost a domesticity to the Whitney's galleries. This is important because the Whitney Museum actually began in a residential area, in a residential building in downtown Manhattan. And when they moved up on Madison Avenue, they wanted to keep this idea that the experience of art, both personal and as a group, was something that would happen in the parlor, that's something that would happen in the living room. So the Whitney is actually, with the moat around it, with its cladding of granite, of stone, it's actually trying to protect a very elite understanding of art and the preciousness of art. The contrast between the Whitney's elitism and the Centre Pompidou's inviting the masses and the populace into art could not be more different.